What is up? I guess you're here to find out about what does Center of Excellence for Cloud does in Atlassian and how do they make decisions being a global team in a remote world. So some of the topics we covered with Michael Fuller from Atlassian is how do they deal with the challenge of maintaining security standards in a global organization like Atlassian, which is such a massive AWS footprint. We also talk about how do they measure maturity in a cloud context, and we go into why is it important to have a decision framework, the same decision framework for the entire organization to make decision making easy in a global organization at Atlassian. Hope you guys like this video. If you do, subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notification when the next video gets uploaded. If you do have any comments or questions, leave them here or connect with the guest or head to the link to listen to the whole podcast. But until next time, let's get into the episode. Peace. Who is Michael Fuller?
Yeah, so I've been at Atlassian for just coming up to 8 years now. I've traditionally come from a sysadmin background, and I was a sysadmin at Atlassian for the first couple of years at my sort of career here. In the last sort of 5 to 6 years, have moved into what is the Cloud Center of Excellence at Atlassian, especially as Atlassian chose to go towards cloud. And so really sort of focus in sort of enabling teams around the organization to do cloud correctly. And so, finance and risk and compliance, and then obviously for this podcast, the security team within Atlassian.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really good that because yeah, I was gonna say with the whole cloud security thing, it's always I get different answers for this question. So I'm curious to know, what is cloud security for you?
So I take a very sort of, I guess, engineering background to this answer, and so maybe a pure security person might cringe at my answer. I don't know, maybe. But the way I think of cloud security is kind of what is different in the cloud to what we had within the data center. And so if I look at sort of the operating system, the application that's running, most of that sort of stays fairly the same when you move to cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at the data center layer, I mean, there is still physical kit somewhere, right? But we're making a trade-off that someone else is going to be doing that access control and that sort of stuff. And so I think once you've sort of decided to be a cloud-first company,
Yeah.
You've probably reasoned with the shared responsibility model of cloud and gone past that, is the cloud secure phase and more to the how do we operate securely in the cloud. And so we're trusting the cloud service provider to give us those low layer things. We should be able to continue to do traditional security at the operating system and up. And it's that piece in the middle that I think is cloud security. Everything gets different as a cloud service versus what you had in the data center. And so, we didn't really have a globally accessible control API within the data center, right? And so there's a whole things that are different. And that's where I would sort of classify cloud security sitting.
Sure. And I think too, it's very interesting that you mentioned how security has kind of evolved in the cloud space as well, right? So with Center of Excellence, what do you guys do? Or guys and girls, I guess, depending on who's in the team. And how do you guys enable security in your organization? And I guess everyone should be considering it, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely think everyone should consider it. So let's just get that out of the way first. And for our journey, like just in general, like cloud maturity at Atlassian has been on a journey for 6 years. What my team is kind of focused on is what is common across all of our sort of cloud footprint. What is, if we look at the way teams are operating, the number of accounts that we have, what are the sort of control aspects that are common across all of that footprint? And so, and can we as a center of excellence take those controls on and provide sort of the business a way of sort of ignoring or at most sort of knowing that those layers of settings are done sort of correctly. And so, if we look at an individual engineering team, they're going to want to do, set up some things very specific to them. And that stuff is great for the engineering team to focus on. When it comes to like cloud security, there's a whole pile of controls at the cloud layer. At the, every individual account has a whole heap of settings that can be set. And so what we want to do at the Center of Excellence side is think about, can we make a corporate standard on how those settings should be? And then can we take on the task of making sure those particular settings are being set and they're monitored and alerted upon? and so that the company can kind of feel like at some base layer we are, standardized across the whole cloud footprint. And we know that if anything steps outside of that standard, that there is processes and practices and alerting, et cetera, in place.
All right. So well, for lack of a better word, you guys are guardians of the galaxy, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, either that or like I use the term "big brother,"
Yeah,
polite.
yeah, fair enough. I was going to ask, obviously, doing this across Atlassian, which is a global organization, standardizing this, what can you think of any challenges that you came across? Obviously, apart from getting a lot of teams to agree on something, were there any challenges that you can share in the process of implementing, I guess, standardized controls across, and what made it work, and what would you recommend to people who are trying to do this?
Probably the biggest challenge we have is with M&As, mergers and acquisitions, is we're bringing in an org that's probably fairly well established within cloud, and now we're trying to merge them in and come up with a sort of commonality of agreement on these standards, and so they
Yeah,
might have different points on that. And so we do spend a lot of time sort of figuring out how to sort of merge different environments together. And it's, sometimes it's really easy. There's like, especially when the merging in company is less cloud mature, they kind of are more willing to adopt Atlassian's kind of thinking. But the more mature M&As that we do, they're the ones that we have to put a lot more time and energy into making sure that there is, I guess, taking the opportunity to learn that we're not missing some thinking that company had that was really awesome.
yeah,
At the same time, making sure that we do end up with some sort of standardization, because what we call snowflakes, basically slow down the speed of Atlassian.
yeah,
Um, that's probably the biggest challenge as far as like outside of M&As, when we look at new staff. And so, every week we're bringing in new staff at Atlassian globally, and they come with different levels of cloud knowledge themselves. And so education around cloud becomes another challenge for Atlassian, and just how to make sure that there's at least some base layer of understanding about how things work and how they should work. And then there's also, when we look at new staff joining Atlassian, so we have new staff joining every week globally, and they come in with different levels of cloud maturity, cloud knowledge themselves,
yeah.
and so they introduce a challenge of education for us, and so making sure that everybody has a base level of understanding of what cloud is and how it works, but not just sort of cloud itself, but cloud at Atlassian. So we have a particular view on how cloud should work within Atlassian, and making sure that everyone is understanding that.
Oh, sweet. And do you guys run regular training for new joinees, or is it more, and to your point, because everyone comes with a different set of, I guess, awareness of cloud? Some people are coming from I guess, a really mature organization. Some may be coming from a less mature. How do you level that playing field for them to accept the Atlassian way of doing cloud?
So there's kind of two parts to this. There's just cloud knowledge in general, and so we'll work with our main cloud is no secret. We use Amazon Web Services, and so we work with their training engine to be able to push our staff out and get trained at cloud just from a general perspective. And then we do boot camps for particular parts of cloud at Atlassian, and so we have a PaaS within Atlassian that enables our teams to deploy, their ideas out to production,
Yeah.
and so there's training boot camps around that. And so what my team does, and is probably going to put a lot more energy on over the next sort of 12 months, is especially with more work from home, is building out sort of like training videos around the things that we know and the standards that we apply to an account, and so that we can sort of onboard people with just watching a few videos.
Oh, right. So this would be training for people who are, say, doing DevOps or some kind of automation or building applications on the PaaS platform, or I guess AWS in general. This would be
Yeah.
for that breadth of, yeah, people, I guess. Also, you guys do training as well, and it's not
Yeah.
just maintaining
Enough.
the security.
Yes.
Oh.
I think we do a bit of it. We've done like a handful of different talks that we do internally, and but I think it's one that we're going to put a lot more energy on, because it is so important. And it's one of the big challenges, that education piece.
Do you find that, I guess, showing the importance of security, is that easier for new starters and everyone understands the importance of security?
Yeah, I think generally people, you know, I am less trouble trying to convince people that they need to do things for security reasons than I do convincing people they need to do it for financial reasons.
Right. Oh, so it's easier to make them understand that it's a security thing rather than a financial thing. Fair enough. Um, because you've been in Atlassian since I guess a long time, and you kind of saw that maturity in cloud as well. How do you classify maturity in cloud, and what would you consider someone starting off um, in cloud today versus super mature? Like, how do you scale that? Like, what does that scale look like for you?
Well, it's kind of funny because if you drop someone who's not done cloud before into a large cloud environment, they're definitely going to sort of, make a big pile of mistakes. Um, but that's kind of not usually what happens when, an organization goes to the cloud. They kind of like start in a crawl phase where they've got a little tiny bit of cloud infrastructure, and then they slowly grow more and more. And so usually I find cloud maturity is more sort of reflective of kind of how long you've been doing it and the growth curve at scale. So, if you started out fairly small and you went from very small to very big really quickly, but I can't find, sort of those standards within your organization around cloud security, then I know that you're not very mature security wise, while you might have a large cloud footprint. But if you've done this over a slower period of time and you've got these standards of how particular settings should be, you're integrating some sort of either the cloud provided security tools or third party security tools into your cloud layer. Effectively, you should have the security czar or something like that. Someone who's responsible for thinking about this cloud security layer. And so usually what happens with the cloud platforms is the DevOps teams go headlong, 100 mile an hour into cloud, and then everybody else around them has to figure out what the hell's going on, right? And so I think it's at that point where you've realized you've gone headlong very fast into the cloud, and now you're actually building those standards and practices around cloud. um, I don't think that I'll ever get to a point where I can ask my security head of security, are you happy with cloud security? Because I think if you ever said yes, then we probably have a problem.
Yeah.
But in the same token, I also talk about, from if I look across all of the pillars we support, is sometimes just knowing where you have problems is a maturity feature in itself.
Oh, right. And I think to your point about where does standardization help you in maturity? Because you guys obviously have developed a standard, and anyone who's listening who's probably not started on their maturity journey in cloud or are thinking of, oh my God, this sounds like a lot of work. Where do I start today for cloud security? What do you recommend to them?
Yeah, I think, like, when I look across the cloud providers themselves, they've done a lot of work to make security easy in the cloud.
Mm,
If you went back to 2015, there was a lot of sentiment that the cloud was insecure. And so over the last sort of 5 years, you've seen them double down a lot of effort into making sure that people understand that the cloud can be secure if done correctly. And so their tooling that they've built over the last 5 years really enables you to be more secure within the cloud. And so it's the main thing though is you have to turn that tools on, right? And so when it's coming to things like access logs and audit logs and all the different sort of monitoring tools that are available to the cloud platform itself, if you're not turning those on, then obviously you can't sort of be secure, right? Like you
of
can't
course.
know if or not, I guess, is probably a better way of saying that. And so the standards that we kind of apply is like, we know about these tools and we know that this is how we want them set up. And so we start to build standards on, this is how this should be set, this is how that should be set. And so we're kind of rolling that out across the whole cloud platform in its entirety, because we don't want to find that there's pockets that are being sort of ignored within the cloud platform, because that's probably where you're going to end up with a bit of pain coming from.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point for AWS specifically. Now, since AWS has the whole control tower, where it's like a template for the kind of account that you can create. A lot of people were already doing this, and I assume that's kind of what you mentioned when you said you already have predefined like logging that you should have turned on. For people who are listening and they already have a lot of accounts, which they may or may not be aware on how secure they are, and obviously new accounts are being added consistently. For those folks, would you where do you recommend they start? Should they start at the new account and get the baseline and then try and go back, or what do you recommend for them for starting?
So there's a pile of really good white papers written by Amazon, and I think that in general they can kind of apply to all cloud. So there's obviously the well architected white paper, which has a whole security pillar in it. But then there's sort of like CIS white papers as well that recommend settings specific to Amazon cloud. I don't know if they do a GCP version, but I'm sure that there's probably GCP and Azure either
I'm sure,
coming
yeah.
or and so it's like looking across those white papers, you get a good feel for which of those settings need to be turned on and why. They give you a sort of a high importance down to low importance. And so if I was to say what's the most important thing, I would say, well, go to the white paper, the CIS white paper, and pick all the high importance things and just make sure those are the things that are being set within your accounts, and then start to move down the stack to the high, from high important to just important down to low important. And you need to put a bit of a your own org spin on some of these things. Like, we don't do everything in the CIS white papers, but we have other controls that are in place that kind of negate the need for certain things. And so I would say that most of what is sort of required from a baseline is really just turning things on or setting things in a particular way. If you um if you really don't know where you are in that journey, there's lots of different tools. There's open source tools that can do like a scan of an account and give you a bit of feedback. So there's things like Netflix Security Monkey and Scout 2 by a company I can't remember the name of right this moment. Then there's third party platform, paid third party tools that can really give you good insights to what's set properly and what's not. And that really helps you just accelerate to the point where you know where you are.
Sure. And what about compliance then? I think we kind of touched upon cloud security and kind of look at compliance too. What about standardizing compliance across multiple AWS accounts or multiple, I guess, cloud environments? What's your approach for that?
You mean compliance to the security standard, or compliance is in like risk and compliance?
Risk and compliance. Sorry, as I meant. Yeah.
So what we do for our compliance team within Atlassian, we think about what are the controls that need to be in place, or what are the settings that need to be in place to achieve, basically tick that tick box on one of those compliance reports. And a lot of those, settings can actually apply the same sort of checkbox to multiple different reports. So whether it's Sarbanes-Oxley or SOC 2, effectively these controls can allow us to say, yes, we have that covered.
Yeah.
And so we go through in parallel to the security checks is how do these then also then enable us to check those risk compliance checkboxes, and then how do we make sure that we have I guess it goes that one step further. It's like, if this checkbox is not ticked, how do we track that it how it got unticked? How do we check that it was unticked for a reason, and the
Or like a
reason for it,
drift.
etc. Auditing time, we can kind of explain these events and everything.
I'm assuming all that's recorded in a Jira and Confluence.
Yep, of course.
Of course it is. No, just checking. The other question that I have is, you kind of mentioned on the ongoing compliance thing, um, and we spoke about maturity as well. What about threats and working with different kind of security incidents? Because obviously, from my understanding, you work quite closely with the security team. Is your team also trained in security incidents, so you could be that first line of defense, or does it go straight to security?
Yeah, security does the first line of defense. So that they have particular team parts of their teams are focused on that first line defense. What my team usually gets involved in is once there is an investigation in action, they might pull us in as subject matter experts. So while we have a sort of security function, we also have support for the architecture of cloud, and we have highly certified cloud engineers within our team. And so, when they're looking at hey, this is how this thing is configured. Is this, potential? What can I do with this particular setting, or what are the other ways that we should be thinking about this particular configuration? We're able to then come into that and support the security team and be able to actually explain the full extent of what a configuration is and how it can be used, and that then gives them the sort of extra insight to think. You know, is have they basically figured out the full extent of this investigation, or are they missing parts of the picture because they're not aware that, you know, this particular configuration allows you to pivot, or there's an escalation path through this particular way of configuring things.
All right. And I think to your point about this kind of goes back to standardizing security as well, because there's already a security standard across the board. You kind of know how quickly you can apply something or change something as well.
Yeah, and so generally, you know, there's only a handful of you know, personnel within Atlassian that have quite wide access to the cloud platform, you know, for obvious reasons.
Hmm.
But my team is one of these teams because we are the ones going and setting all these settings across all the account. That also means that we have access to get to those settings within all of our accounts. And so, if a security team wants to be able to go in and you know, check a setting or change a setting, then they can use us as their proxy. So we have that access for them, and
Yeah.
we can go those things, following, you know, proper our risk and compliance processes and stuff.
Sweet. And are you guys at that stage where you're doing auto remediation for breaches of compliance or breaches of, I guess, policies?
We have some, like, so most of those sort of base layer standards, you know, where settings have to be in a particular way. If they drift at all, then yes, there's tooling to push those back into place and report upon that. When it gets to the higher level configuration specific to a, you know, individual resource within cloud, we're getting sort of closer and closer to thinking about auto remediation in some of those areas. But most at the moment is just making sure that we have full visibility of everything going on, and we have good monitoring on every resource. Because Atlassian works in a bit of a trust verify model. So, you know,
Okay.
we trust our right thing, but we have to put a lot of effort into making sure that we're verifying that that's exactly what's happening.
All right. So, as part of standardization, and one of the people that I was talking to from one of the big telcos over here, which I'm pretty sure you would know which one it is, they were talking about this, that they had standardized security, and they had followed this process where they were approving the kind of services people could use on the organization. Say, for example, you can use S3 bucket, but you can't use RDS, or you can use S3 bucket and RDS, but you can't use Glue or something else which has come out recently. Does setting standards kind of bring that on board as well, or is it a lot more freedom for the developers?
Yeah, for us, it's all about the speed of innovation, and to say you can't use this new feature until, you know, a single team goes through and reviews it, would definitely slow down that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we're within controls, right? And so we could probably isolate the new service activity to one account within the infrastructure. But we definitely, you know, working on that shared responsibility model. We trust that the cloud service provider has done, you know, their due diligence at their layer, and then sort of, as I said, like integrating some third party tooling into the platform enables you to be faster because, you know, they're basically paid to think about the security of all these resources and how you monitor them properly. Whereas, you know, if we're going to build everything ourselves, you know, it's quite likely that we're going to ignore a particular service because we don't think we're going to use it until someone starts using it, right? Where when you look at using a third party tool to monitor security configurations, you know, they will have a customer that's critically important to them for, so they will build a feature around monitoring that. And so, and then they also want to be the first to market, right? And so if a cloud service provider comes out with a new feature or a new product, they want to be the first to market, saying that they support that new product. And so, there's kind of it's a good reason to use a third party vendor there to help you with the monitoring of security. But we definitely don't want to be bottlenecking anyone behind, you know, a sort of white paper, of, you know, someone checking a checkbox to say yes, this is approved now. And I understand why people do it, but you know, it's not the sort of culture within Atlassian.
So, and that's an interesting one, right? How do you bring that back to visibility for yourselves and if someone starts something new?
um as in, like, build the new resource. um
Yep. As in, like, so
uh
if I start something like a Glue today, but you guys have never used Glue, um,
yeah,
or
I think that
Security Hub.
third party vendor, right? Like, we use, you know, a third party vendor that does configuration checks across resources. And so if they believe that there's you know, a medium to high severity of configuration within resources, that you know, should be monitored, they're going to implement that feature, right? And I think in general, though, the cloud center of excellence within Atlassian is quite broadly across nearly every service within the cloud. You know, cloud offering. It's not to say that I know exactly how to deploy a video transcoder service within Amazon, but I'm aware of the service and the breadth of sort of what it does. And so if we start to see those costs coming in from one of those services, we could be aware of it. But I think generally my leaning towards is this idea of using a third party vendor that is just paid to think about the things you should be watching, because they're going to go and implement those features.
True. And to your point, you can't, I mean, as a security team, you already have your hands full across the board already. New companies, sorry, new services and new challenges coming in. Like, how much of it can you really be on top of, right? On top of.
Exactly. Yeah. And to some of that point, it's exactly why my team I think worked well within Atlassian is kind of like security has their handful. And if we can take some of that burden off them to say, hey, this is cloud specific and we can handle this for you. And can we just move the barrier of entry to be a security engineer at Atlassian up a little bit, right? And so if you're in ProdSec or AppSec, really you're just worrying about the access logs, not how you actually got them or where they come from, just that you have access to those things. And some teams just handled that for you.
Oh, yeah. And I think I remember you telling me this when we were talking about this last week, where it was more around leveling up the play field for security as well. So it doesn't matter what new services come in.
Yeah, so we would be sort of the ones that will probably be one of the first teams to play around with new service, or just at least read what it does and how it works. And if we feel that there's a particular concern for security there, we would flag it to security and show them what we think is a concern. And I think that's kind of where the relationship within us and security really built sort of strong foundations, was this back and forth about, here's a cloud configuration, can you see anything wrong with this? Or, hey, have you seen a configuration like that before? And then can you guess what I can do if I have a configuration like that? And so this, back and forth of sort of thinking about, if I put my black hat on, can I think about ways to sort of abuse each other, back and forth? And that really did sort of level both of us up, both teams up, as far as how well we think about privilege escalation and stuff like that within our accounts.
Sweet. This is probably a good segue into my next section, which is Mythbuster. And the first question I've got for the Mythbuster is, what's the most common cloud security myth or misconception you hear?
Um, so I think that there's a certain I'll call them generation of security expert in the field that is still stuck on this idea that if it's someone else's server that it's insecure. And I think that there's maybe a little grain of truth in that. Like, yes, people have physical access to the kit, but if you look at sort of the cloud service providers, they've done a lot to allow you to do encryption at rest using custom managed keys. And I guess on the flip side, they're completely when I hear these stories, they're very biased towards their data center being completely the most secure place in the world. And I worked in data centers for a good 10 years before moving into cloud, and I can tell you now that I don't feel like the data center was that secure. I mean, maybe NSA cage or something like that would be secure, but effectively there's some mid-range paid person at the front door that's checking a license, and then you get access to a room. And then the other thing is you're still in a trust and verify model anyway. You're trusting the people that walk in, that work for you, walk into those cages to be doing the right thing. I guess with the cloud, I feel a bit more confident that, I have ways of using APIs to check that things are plugged together properly as far as, the virtual connects. And then I have to just have a layer of trust in the cloud service provider that the people going into their cages are, at least somewhat vetted properly. But I don't know. I just feel like this feeling that the cloud is still like, sticking in that phase of talking about the cloud as insecure is maybe missing the point. And I think that it usually then leads on to the same conversations about how you can do so much better in the data center, and it's cost effective, and you're missing the point that I think the cloud is about innovation speed, and effectively, if you can sort of see the way we can audit security or audit risk and compliance wise a cloud platform, you can do this with automation and Jira tickets. Whereas if you go and audit a physical data center, you're paying auditors to come in and look and ask people questions and stuff like that. And it takes weeks on end, right? And so I don't know, like it's very much a cloud bubble perspective on this. So
No,
take
nothing
from
wrong. It's actually one of the most common answers that I get for this from like all the guests that I've had so far. Everyone has heard this, and I still find it surprising that we still talk about is cloud secure is still a very common question. Like,
yep.
it's
And
amazing.
the funny thing is, if you look at like the security breaches that get reported in the news, I tried for a good sort of half an hour before coming on this to think about like find one that was like Amazon stuffed up. They're not though. Like its company did some setting that they didn't understand what it meant, and or maybe they did. It's kind of I find it like the equivalent of the sysadmin just choning something 777 because it works, right? And then later finding out that meant that it was really bad. And effectively, that's what we see. The breaches we see, reported in the news. They like to put the Amazon or the GCP brand on it, but the reality is it's company X that did it.
That's true.
Some
That's true.
correct.
So
And the
what?
same in the data center, right? People put stuff public on the internet incorrectly, and you got breached. They
That's
just
right.
didn't say, "Hey, this data center over there got breached." They always said that company, right? It's this funny change in way we report.
Yeah. Just on a similar note, what do you think people are not talking enough about cloud security?
Yeah, so when I look at the change to cloud, like a company can't just do all of the same practices that they were doing in the data center, and they can't just, move to the cloud and just think that it's the data center that changed, right? It's cloud is a paradigm shift in the way people think. And so we see this when we look at the financial aspect of cloud, or definitely within the security aspect of cloud. Within a data center, things didn't replug themselves in, via an API call, and so the way things were set up can change very very rapidly within cloud. And if you're not sort of able to work at that pace, the pace of cloud, then effectively you're just working too slowly. And so if teams like finance and security don't realize that they are actually involved in this cloud change, until you're already in the cloud, then that's usually that point where you start to hear about these cloud breaches, right? It's because the
Yeah.
teams that were involved in this process weren't involved early enough, and then when they are involved, they're trying to catch up.
Yeah, cool. No, that's a great answer, man. I've got another section that I've recently introduced, and we were talking about this offline, the whole work from home thing, because COVID has forced a lot of us to work from home. Atlassian being a global organization, and we spoke about Daisy a bit earlier. Well, I guess this is offline, but if you can share how you guys are working effectively, if you have done something different to work from home, and how Daisy plays a role in this.
Yeah, so I guess I guess first up, Atlassian's 100% work from home globally at the moment. So it's a new experience for us, and I'm sure that there's many companies in a similar boat where this is a brand new experience for them, and we are still figuring this out, just like everybody else. I don't think that we magically were the best company in the world to work from home. Some teams are really taken to it like shining stars, and other teams are really sort of struggling. Um, to figure out exactly how they should be working in this environment. But I think in general that we had, because we were a global company already, we had the challenges of working across the time zone, already, and working on VC calls and stuff like that, and trying to move towards a world where you can work a little bit more asynchronously. And so we were talking offline about the Daisy process at Atlassian. So it's a team playbook available on our website. And this is just really, one example of a structure that Atlassian has that enables us to work from home effectively. And so this is really a decision-making process. It's just starting to rain here, so hopefully you don't get too much of that noise. So the idea here is you have a driver that's kind of wanting to make a change or a decision around some, aspect of Atlassian, an approver who's maybe usually one or maybe two or three people, depending on the importance of the decision to be made. That's basically they're the people that are trying to get, I guess, convinced on this change. The contributors, and this is the main important piece here for the DAISY and why it works well for us, is you bring in contributors from all around the world that are important to this decision being made, and making sure that everybody who should be contributing is contributing to a decision. And then the last is just the informed, who should be aware that this decision is being made and has been made within the company. And so, when you're in a room, you can kind of argue back and forth with each other over, the water cooler. But as you start to work from home or work more globally, then you really have to have some framework that enables this communication to get captured asynchronously and then a decision to be made.
Oh, sweet. No, that's a great answer as well. Are you finding that if this continues, doing security remotely, would that be a challenge?
I don't think so. I think the more that we've built the tooling around the way we work, so both third-party vendor, in-house tooling, and cloud service provider tools, most of this stuff is happening asynchronously already. It's monitoring, alerting, and we, as I said, we already were sort of a global company, so we're already sort of working with teams across the world. But yeah, and so I think in general, the teams are kind of aware of how to work remotely. Some of our security engineers are actually already full-time work from home, and so they're kind of working towards that. But I think in general, all practices within businesses are probably going to be readdressed globally around this idea of what happens if you work from home, or what happens if someone's working from home. And I think, if we all come out the other side of COVID-19 with a more fluid processes around people not being in the same room, it's probably a great thing for everybody.